Round 4. El Budismo Verdadero. Now remember, the Dragon King's daughter is not only the story about a daughter of a dragon who was therefore a dragon herself, but she was also a girl. So, the Dragon King's daughter, as stated before, truly, truly is one of the first Equal Rights Crusaders. El Budismo Verdadero. A few months before I left Denver to move to New York City with my sister and brother-in-law Alberto, I was out seeking contraband of the heroin flavor. I was in a car with some friends of mine when Gilbert, the driver, pulled up in front of Weasel's cousin's house. "You're going to have to wait here, Nici," Weasel said, "because my cousin, Shari, might be inside chanting with a friend. I'm going to go check it out," he continued, "so just hold back." Gilbert nodded his head positive to reinforce what Weasel said, and I knew his nod meant respect. I was so curious. I wanted to know what his cousin was chanting and why. I felt as anxious and excited about this chanting business as I did when my body released a surge of adrenaline right before shooting up heroin. I was so desperate for a solution to all of life's woes and worries that I would have tried just about anything to overcome the unhappiness and confusion in my life. Grasping at straws maybe, but I was impulsively drawn to the idea of chanting. I didn't know that Weasel's cousin chanted Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to purify her life. I didn't know she sought benefit and wisdom when she repeated the rhythm over and over. I didn't know that this life philosophy of true Buddhism professed that earthly desires equaled enlightenment, that I was a father who had planted a jewel in my son's robe. Indeed, I was a son also. I didn't realize I was the Lion King's daughter because somehow I had failed to see my own reflection in the water. I didn't know that I was an alchemist who could turn poison into medicine, or that the invocation of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo was affiliated with a world peace organization that absolutely upheld the dignity of life. I only knew I had caught a sense of something real. I started asking Gilbert all kinds of questions about chanting. He just said it was some kind of Buddhist thing that Weasel's cousin was into. I pretended to have to use the bathroom. I would have used my excuse, any excuse I could think of, to get in the door to Shari's house and get the skinny on this verbal meditation. Gilbert kept his cool and just watched the front door to the house, keeping his senses attuned to what really mattered. Did Shari have any dope or not? The heroin came through and we all got high, but I felt cheated because no one would fill me in on the chanting thing. Weasel's cousin wouldn't let us in her house to get off on the dope she sold us, so we had to drive back to Weasel's house to do it. What I didn't know was that as I sat in the car waiting for my opiates, my sister Sabra was already chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo on a regular basis. Sabra had been introduced in New York City to this life philosophy of Buddhism. She and Alberto had been at it for about a month when they came to Denver on the premise of seeing my sister Geneva graduate from Denver University. The graduation ceremony turned out to be both an accomplishment on Geneva's part and a formal guise to draw my oldest sister to Denver. Alberto and Sabra had come to save me, and this I innately knew. Perhaps it was no more than superstitious speculation to say that a lot of strange occurrences manifested in my life during the initial month of my sister's Buddhist practice. Although I was in Denver and she was in Brooklyn, I believe her chanting affected me. A premise of Buddhist practice is that we practice for ourselves and others. This does not always culminate into the noble altruism it sounds like, because Buddhists believe that one person's unhappiness affects us all. We practice with concern toward each other for a reason. If one person in a family is unhappy, their unhappiness will affect the whole. Likewise, the entire family unit is ignited when one member achieves their happiness. It's a spiritual revolution that defines the power of the people through exemplary proof. Buddhism is a bold discovery of humanity as a resource in and of itself. The ability to tap our inherent happiness develops us into people capable of helping others whose hearts are full of grief. Wisdom and compassion are the two wings we spread in order to manifest our full potential. Evil will never gain momentum in a world full of bold-hearted people who ring true to themselves. The way Sabra's chanting affected me was evident in how difficult a time I was having as a junkie. Her practice was protecting me in a most curious way. Every time I went to cop, my supplying friends were stealing from me. I started getting ripped off frequently from people who had always been trustworthy. I was losing money and heroin so fast that I panicked from the pressure and made a resolution to overdose. I had been getting heroin that was really pure and potent from a source who happened to be Mexican, although there is no stratification when it comes to who has more junkies and pushers and dealers. The Asians, Caucasians, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Chicanos, Latinos, Hispanics, blacks, whites, Anglos, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, half-breeds, or Indians. In our society, the liquid of the morphine runs smoothly through the veins of all humanity, dulling us, nulling us, voiding us blind to the reality of our collective responsibility toward the whole. In order to accomplish a successful suicide, I stole $700 worth of checks from my stepdaddy and cashed them clean as a whistle. There are certain advantages to being white and in the middle, like you can maneuver up alleys and valleys and bank vaults where mostly only white people venture and never be suspect. While I was in front of my mother and stepfather's house stealing checks, for my final bout with dope, I made a phone call to my sister Deanna, who was in Aspen, Colorado. She lived there with her boyfriend in a sort of jet-set way. I dialed the phone number and let the phone ring for a while. "Hello," said my sister Deanna in her coked-out Greta Garbo voice. "Yes," was her inquiry when I choked out my voice. "Deanna, it's Nici. I have to talk to you." "Oh, hello, Nici. What's the matter?" asked Deanna. I swallowed my tears in order to answer. "Deanna, I'm not okay at all. I think I need to see a psychiatrist or something." "What's up, little sister?" Deanna asked as her voice warmed up and dropped its pretentious edge. "Oh, I don't know, Deanna. Maybe I'm just a little depressed or something," came my half-hearted plea for help. "I'll be all right, really." "Well, call me if you need to, Nici. Anytime you need help or just want to talk. Promise? I love you, little sister. Remember to call if you need to," said my mama's second child, her daughter, Deanna Lynn. I hung up the phone feeling as futile as ever, not knowing until later how seriously Deanna had taken my plea for help. After I had hung up the phone with her, Deanna went outside to smell the mountain spring flowers and got stung by a bee right smack in the middle of the main vein of her arm, at precisely the same point I had hit up in my own arm so many times. Besides being beautiful beyond belief, my goddess sister Deanna was a heroine by nature. She started beating up the neighborhood boys back in Littleton by age 6 or 7. One time, she sent Joey Owens home crying because she hit him so hard in the gut. Joey's dad called my dad, who laughed at the story of how his little girl Deanna had beat up Joey for throwing a rock at her little brother, Chip. Another time, when my family was on our annual summer vacation in Grand Lake, Colorado, Deanna saved Chip from drowning. There was a river that rushed behind the mountain cabins where we lodged, on its way to flow into the natural fishing, swimming, and water skiing lake. Chip had rolled up his blue jeans and was heading across a bridge of slimy rocks when he slipped and fell into what were some mighty mean rapids for a 5-year-old kid. Deanna heard him screaming and ran into the river herself. She was more determined than that flow of water and grabbed Chip before his head split open on a rock. The girl had grit. She was fearless in a way that left me awestruck. And her bravery was but one of her secrets. Deanna would come home carrying snakes over her shoulders like a little Huck Finn and scare the living daylights out of our father. He was as squeamish as she was fearless, but I knew by the way his eyes sparkled when he saw her that our daddy loved his little tiger of a girl. So when Deanna got stung by the bee that mistook one mountain flower for another, she took it as an omen that I was shooting up. Divine intervention or not, it was a highly perceptive call, I would say. She raced her car down one mountain and up another until she got to Denver. She immediately called my mother and told her about my phone call. Together they went to my apartment and let themselves in with a key that Deanna had conveniently kept for herself when she had moved out of the apartment and left it for me. Inside they found a note by my telephone that read, "I can't even kill myself right." That's all it said. So this mother and daughter team went all over Denver looking for me. Deanna and my mother showed up at the friend's house where I was and buzzed the buzzer to get in. I didn't know they had entered my apartment and read my note, so I wasn't hiding from them. But when the buzzer buzzed, I looked out the window to see if I recognized any cars in the parking lot. When I spotted my mom's car, I almost died of a heart attack. What on earth is my mother doing here? I wondered. I was prepared to die, but not to face my mother. The part of myself I wanted to hide from most had manifested externally in the form of my caring mother, who was in search of her lost daughter. I was thoroughly ashamed of myself for what I had put her through in life. All the grief I'd caused her, all the disappointments she'd had to endure because my promising young life had ended up in failure. How I had let her down was a burden I wanted to escape from forever. Yet here she was, my most revealing reflection, the banner of all my past causes unfurled into the reality of my mother, who had come to save me from Dante's Inferno. Eventually my mother and Deanna gave up on the buzzer, and I immediately sought to soothe my anxiety with some good heroin. I went across town to the house of my Mexican friend, who was an elderly gentleman who lived with his even more elderly mother, his sister, her daughter and husband, and an ample amount of cousins, nieces, and nephews. There were always people livening up that household. The heroine I had been copying from Black Bryce, a name somebody had dubbed my dealing friend, either because he was a dark Hispanic or because of the dark color that signified a good Mexican heroin mixture, had been so consistently good that I knew it for a sure one. And as confident as a poker playing, holding a hand with 4 aces, I took my whole wad of money to Black Bryce. I met up with him at a bar on Larimer Street, which happened to be the very same street corner where my perpetrating Danish grandfather had been drug up as a child. Black Bryce took my money and handed it over to someone who was much obliged to leave out the back kitchen door with it, having no intention of returning. I didn't know that Black Bryce was hurting. A man who had been running heroin for over 40 years had no loyalties or conscience when it came to an aching body. He could turn on you like a doggone rabbit. I was sure that Bryce was going to meet up with the disappearing act later. They probably used my stepdaddy's money to buy enough heroin to deal and get off on for a good long while. Anyway, I was sick and tired of not being successful at anything, including a calculated suicide plan. Sabra's chanting was stirring up so much commotion in my life that by the time she arrived in Denver, I was surrounded by her incantation of the Lotus Sutra, which was shielding me from my suicidal tendencies and my addictive-driven antics. Everything and everyone turned into a Buddhist god determined to help me turn my life around. Sabra's song was strong enough to cause an invisible cluster of molecules to transform into savior-induced energy that was guarding me. A concept as religiously beguiling as the Immaculate Conception. Her chanting stirred up the last remaining embers of my life, which began to ignite my passion for living, transpiring into, I'd say, an honest rendition of the resurrection. We just did round 4, Pearlie. It's a hot one today, huh?